interesting things that you can do with ChatGPT. So before I get into actually running on the actual GPT here, just as a level set, if you haven't seen it yet, I encourage you to go to userogue.com, right? And I've started putting together these um, prompt smart cards, right? Sort of a cheat sheet, but really focused towards particular tasks. I think there's a lot of cheat sheets out there or smart cards out there that give you like, here's the 7 different things you need in a prompt. And they have, kind of different ideas like, oh, be a marketing manager, be a social media maven. And then they kind of give you the 7 things, but they're really not contextualized for government contracting. I think government contracting is a little more specialized than most realms where you can't just do a general thing. So we started making these resources. So if you go to userogue.com, you go to resources, you go to the GPT Masterclass, which again is another free resource for everybody if you want to kind of get spun up on how to do the GPT things. But right here under GovCon GPT Smart Cards, you can go ahead and download any of these. So what we're going to go through today is actually the Capture Plan Super Smart Card. It's fairly comprehensive. It's, I'll be honest, somewhat complex, right? It's a very intricate prompt that we're going to go through. But I'm going to break it down into each individual component so you can understand what it is that we're doing, okay? Okay, so talking about the GPT, right? So there's a number of different components you have to give to a GPT to give it sort of the information it needs to actually do its job, right? If you just think about how these models are developed, they are built off of essentially an entire corpus of the internet. So you kind of have to use your inputs to narrow that entire internet down to just the thing you want it to do. You're kind of scoping it all the way down. And with that, you give it a persona, you give it context or background, you give it information, and then you tell it specifically what you want to do. Think of this as like, I like to think of ChatGPT or any of the other GPTs, right? And we can talk about a bunch of them. There's Bard, there's Anthropic, there's a lot, there's Pi.ai. I like to use ChatGPT because it's the most common. It's what everyone's familiar with. And it honestly is starting to emerge with the best features. Right. So I like to think of it as sort of a junior writing assistant, someone who maybe just got out of college, they don't know their job yet, and I have to give them guidance on how to do what I want them to do because they don't necessarily know, right? They know how to write, but they don't know what to write. They don't know why to write. They don't know how to write. Okay, so I have gone ahead, and if you're following along on the smart card, go ahead. The first initial prompt is pretty comprehensive. And I actually already put it into GPT here so that we could get started. Now notice, if you're familiar with how this works, if you've used ChatGPT before, I'll show you real quick, right? If I start a new chat, there's a number of different options here. If I have ChatGPT Plus, right, I'm going to use specifically the advanced data analytics component. And the reason for that is you have to be on the advanced data analytics tool in order to upload documents. It's the bottom line, right? You can use the default and it just you use it like a typical prompting. You can give it pictures, so you can ask it about pictures. If you use browse with Bing, you notice that icon goes away, so you can't upload pictures and then ask about it with Bing. You can't upload documents and then ask with Bing, but when you have browse with Bing on, you can do some searching of the internet. But when you turn on advanced data analytics, you can actually upload documents, which is what we're going to need to do today, because what I want to do is I want to give the GPT some content, some source documents that I am using to create a capture plan, right? So I'm going to go back here, right? So what we're going to do is, it took away my initial prompt. Sad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it this first prompt so we can skip ahead a little bit, right? So I'll take this. If you're looking at that cheat sheet or that smart card, it has this structure built into it. I want to put it in there so I can talk you through it really quick. It's not working either. Obviously, ChatGPT is having issues this morning. We'll just start right here. Boom. Okay, so we'll stick it in there. So this is my initial prompt, right? And I'm going to start off by giving it a persona and some context, right? I'm going to tell it what it is, right? So you are a business developer who works for a government contracting company called TAC. Why did I say what contracting company? Because when it generates, it's going to use that as a cue. So if I just wanted to talk about Acme Corp, maybe I don't tell it what company it's using, but I wanted to specifically talk about my company, right? I'm going to give it a little bit of background about what our company does, right? Because if you think about it, if it has the entire corpus of the internet and it's talking about any government contracting company, you could talk about any range of things, okay? So I'm going to tell it specifically what we do. Think of this as kind of just a snippet out of your company slick sheet, right? How do you talk about yourself? Right? Specifically, we work for the Department of Army. Our company's differentiators are ABC. Now, I'm going to give it its persona, right? I'm going to give it some identity, right? Your job within the company is to identify opportunities to bid on and justify in a capture plan why you should bid on those opportunities, right? This is essentially just describing like, hey, if I had somebody fresh out of college, first day on the job, right? They took this job as a helping me in capture planning. I would have to explain this to them. So I'm doing exactly the same thing with this GPT. Unfortunately, you have to do it straight. You have to do it every time you create a new prompt. But as you get better at this, as you do it more often, you'll take notes. You'll maintain a slick sheet. You might maintain a Word document with kind of your best and brightest prompts. Now, let's remember, GPT does not know what a capture plan is necessarily. And there we can do some chain of thought using Bing if we want. If we get to that today, I can show you how that works. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start giving it an instruction, right? So I gave it a persona, I gave it context and background. Now I'm going to start working out my instructions. So I need you to write a detailed capture plan for me. I'm going to tell you what I want that capture plan to look like, right? So I wanted to include an executive summary. I wanted to include a customer analysis. I wanted to include capability gaps, right? So all I did was I took my company best practices for how we put together a capture plan. And I'm going to list that out with a little description of what each one of those things is, right? I don't want it to be ambiguous to the GPT. I don't want it to generate just any content. I want it to create the kind of content that I need for this plan, okay? Now I'm going to get really specific about how I want it to generate, okay? You may have heard of zero-shot learning or zero-shot generation, right? If I give it all this information and I tell it, hey, okay, now go write me a capture plan, it'll go off and write it however it wants. But because we're becoming masters in this sort of prompting and generation process, I know some of those shortfalls. I know how it can kind of go off the rails. So I'm going to mitigate that with some very specific instructions. So here's what I'm going to say, right? I gave it my format that I want it to go through. Now I'm going to tell it how to go through it, right? This is your task. Here's your constraints. I want you to do it this specific way. I want you to write sections 2 through 5 first, right? Because there's an executive summary, which should summarize sections 2 through 5. So I actually wanted to write 2 through 5 first, and then I wanted to go back and create the executive summary. So I'm going to tell it to do that first, okay? I want you to analyze the overview, right? So if we're going to build a customer analysis, I need to give it some initial content. I need to give it some information about that customer so it can write that customer analysis. It'll write me a customer analysis, but if I don't give it any insights about that customer, then it's going to be hallucination-y, right? It's going to look kind of crummy. But I can get ahead of that. I know that. So I'm going to give it information so it creates a good piece of content. Okay. So I want you to analyze the AAL overview that I'm going to give you. I want you to analyze a product catalog for a competitor, right? So part of this capture planning is I want to do customer analysis, capability gap analysis, and some competitor analysis, right? So I'm going to give it background on the customer, background on my competitors, things that I can find off of the internet, right? Now, I want you to analyze the RFI document that I upload. So you can identify key themes, etc. Right? I want you to look for shalls and wills. And then I want you to formulate that, right? So that section 2 is going to be rather robust. So I'm going to tell it exactly how I want it to write section 2, how I want it to give it back to me. I want you to read these documents and then give me back this comprehensive piece of content. Okay. Then I want you to move into section 3. I want you to compare my customer catalog or my company information with my competitors' catalog, right? I want you to format section 3 in this particular way, right? I'm going to give it very specific instructions so that when it goes in to start generating, right, I don't have to keep going back and telling it, no, you didn't do that right. Do it this other way. I'm going to give those instructions up front. And what this is going to do is it's going to store that information in the AI's sort of working memory, so that as we go through these steps, it'll be able to go in and sort of retrieve those pieces of content and use them for the tasks that I give it. Okay. Okay, so now I want at least one page for each section. Okay. I'm going to tell it, because if I don't give it any instructions about how long or short I want it to be, it'll write however much it wants, right? So I'm going to tell it I want at least a page because I'm trying to write a 5-page capture plan, right? I want you to write each section as a separate generation. Now, this is a key sort of pro skill, right? This is a pro prompt to put in here. Why do we want it to generate each section separately? Because we want this to be separate generation tasks, because we want to be able to give the AI corrections on each section. So I've told it, I want 5 sections. I want my sections laid out this particular way, right? And I want you to treat each section as a separate task so that it generates section 2. And I can iterate with the GPT and have it refine and improve section 2 before we move on to the next section. So it's not creating an entirely new document. If I have to make it corrections, I can break down that task into a smaller task, right? We'll talk a little bit about a chain of logic and chain of thought later. But this is the idea, right? I want you to do each one so I can make in-course corrections and I don't waste time regenerating over and over again, right? I'm going to upload requirements documents, customer overview documents, and competitor documents, and our past performance documents. So I'm telling the GPT, I'm going to give you the content you need to do this task. So don't start generating. This is the important thing. Don't start generating until I've given you those documents. That's the cue I'm giving the AI. And then last but not least, there was some research done by Google that showed that if you are nice to the GPT, right, if you say please and thank you, and if you treat it almost like a high schooler who's about to take a standardized exam, the net outputs are actually higher quality. So this is another sort of pro tip, is this line in particular: take a deep breath and proceed with this task step by step, right? And this actually instructs the AI to look at the instructions you've given it. It tells it to think through the task one step at a time and then start doing the tasks one step at a time, okay? Again, a little bit of a pro tip. So just to recap, we gave it a persona. We told it who it is, what its job is, what company it works for. We gave it all this background and context information. We gave it an overall task, right? This is background context on the task. I have 5 sections I need to write. Now I'm going to give you very detailed instruction on how I want you to write each one of those sections. You can be as generic or as detailed as you want, but the more specificity, the more specification you give up front, the less you're going to have to give afterwards. And because this kind of, it almost waterfalls as you generate through, the more you can front load, the more high quality the content is going to do while you're doing a chain of thought. Okay, so now you see, I actually went ahead and made that that initial instruction, right? This entire sheet here, almost an entire page of content, is one prompt. It's one prompt. There's a lot going into that prompt, but it's one prompt. And now you'll see what the AI did is it read all those instructions and said, okay, cool. Now give me the information you told me you're going to give me, Okay, so this is where I'm going to upload some content, right? And I'm going to start with, I'm going to give it to him. And I've tried this a couple of different ways, a couple of different times. So I'm going to upload this document and say, here is the customer overview document. I have 3 more documents to give you, but I am going to do so one at a time, right? Okay, so you can upload all 4 of the documents, but because of sort of extraction techniques and buffering, I've found that it's better to be clear with the GPT, right? Like I've told it what documents I'm going to give it, and then be clear about when I give it those documents. So I've referenced up here, here's the documents I'm going to give you. Here's the document I've given you, but I want you to analyze it one at a time. Okay. Let's do this. Now, read and understand that document first, then I'll give you the next one. And why am I doing this? Because what the AI actually does is, like, this is a front end interface. Behind this is a language model, right? It's understanding my instructions. But behind that language model, the way ChatGPT in particular works is it has a bunch of different tools in its toolkit in the background. Okay. And what it's going to do is it analyzes what you give it, and then it determines which tool to pick to process it. So when we're talking about PDF documents, we all know that PDFs come in various forms and various levels of quality. So if I give it 4 different PDF documents that have different data structures, they've been encoded differently, they might have some variance there. It might pick one tool to try and process all 4 of those documents and then come across a roadblock and then error out, and it causes a bunch of extra time. Okay, great. That's fantastic. Now what I'm going to do is create a detailed list of customer requirements. No, please proceed. I am now going to give you the RFI document to read. Okay, I'm going to upload the RFI document. And Rachel, I'm guessing this is probably where you might have run into an issue. If you try to upload all those documents at once, sometimes it errors out. Okay, so now it's read the RFI document. Great. Okay, now I am going to give you an example of a company past performance for your analysis. Great. And see that it actually went through, and I told it shall and will, and it actually found that the verbs in the RFI are provide and deliver. So it's having the ability, I've given it kind of enough space and enough bandwidth to be able to really do an in-depth analysis of the document I've given it, so it can really crunch through that RFI. Now, if I dumped all 4 documents on it at the same time, it may not have had this high quality of a read through. Great. Okay. So another thing I'll share with you is if you stop it from generating, it hasn't stopped thinking. It's just stopped outputting into your interface, right? So if you're, what I'm trying to do right now, I'm just trying to load this thing with content. I'm just trying to give it data that it can go forth and do its work with. So I don't need to spit out all this content. I can just stop it and say, hey, here, I'm going to give you another example. I'm going to give you my past performance document. Okay. And again, I'm going to reference the relevance of that document. I'm going to give it to it. And now it's going to crack that PDF open. It's going to read through it. It's going to figure out what's going on. Great. Finished working. Fantastic. Okay. Now the last document is my competitor capabilities document. document. So I just pulled this off of a corporate website. It seemed relevant. So all this is perfectly open source information. Nothing's proprietary, nothing is CUI. Now I will say, while that's generating, don't put any CUI information in here. Don't put any proprietary information in here. If you want to use a chat GPT or a GPT type model that is safe, please go to userogue.com/resources. We actually have a chat interface that's very much like this. You can put in a lot of the same sort of background information if you like, but it's running in a NIST 800-171 compliant environment. So you can actually put proprietary data in there, and it doesn't fall victim to the input and output filtering that is the security concern with these models. Okay, cool. So great, this works. Okay, now see, now it's gotten to the end, and the way that I set up that initial prompt, if we go all the way back up here, the way I set up this initial prompt, I basically told the AI that it needs to do this step by step. So what I get is, before it goes off and does whatever it wants, it asks me for instruction to go do that. Okay, so I say, yes, please proceed. And so I put all that effort in up front, and now most of my inputs from this point forward are going to be responsive. It's going to ask me, hey, was this, here's my answer for section 2. Is this good? Yes or no? And I'll say yes or no. And it'll ask me if I want to proceed, right? If I'm not good with it, I can say no, and I can say, hey, I want you to fix this particular portion, right? And we can work circularly. We can work through this section, right? If I want to say network integration, I could say something like, please revise this section and expound on the use of right? So I can, we're still within the context of this section. I can give it corrections to make. And so if I tell it, hey, you made a mistake here, or I want you to add more of X, right? I can stay within the context of this section, and you'll see it's going to regenerate the things I didn't tell it to fix, right? So it's going to keep what's good, and it's going to improve what isn't good. And it's going to start lacing in, see there's MOSA, great. Okay, so this is how that works. And we'll go through, yep, see, there's another one. Yep, let's go, proceed. Let's go to the next section. Now, it was a lot of work to put all of this information in context up front, right? This is a 650 word prompt. That's why we put it in that prompt smart card. So you can just kind of replace the placeholders with your relevant content and then move from there. And the other pro tip that I'll show you as we're going through this, right? Okay, it's building out the capture strategy. That's fantastic. All right, we'll proceed to section 5. About 7 more minutes left. The other thing I'll mention is, if you need to make corrections, right? If you make an input correction, right? There is this edit button here where you can go in and you kind of change or tweak your prompt, right? Maybe I put something in and I got kind of a wildly off base output that I really didn't like, right? We'll use this relatively straightforward example right here, right? Maybe I want to correct this customer analysis, right? Like, okay, I want to go back and fix this because it isn't quite what I wanted. Well, I'm going to actually, if you see right here, we have a whole lot of work that's been done here by the GPT, and that's fine. But I want to actually go back and fix what I've done here. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to say, no, actually, for the customer analysis, let's talk about the Army futures command. And, apologies for those of you who are fully civilian. I was a former Army guy, so you're going to get a lot of military relevant inputs. Customer and competitor profiles, analysis documents. No, Rachel, I pulled those straight off the internet. Yeah. So Rachel asked, did you use ChatGPT to create the customer and competitor profiles? No, I went out, I found an opportunity on sam.gov. Right. Here's the actual opportunity on sam.gov. Right. And this one's closed, so the links are gone, but the actual solicitation is there. So RFI : terrain mapping. This is the actual opportunity. So I, human, went out and did that. I tried doing it with ChatGPT plus Bing, but like the output just wasn't good enough. So there's still things that the human is the best at. And one of them is probably like front-end market research and capture research, right? So I found that. I found the Army Applications Lab. I looked for a overview briefing for the Army Applications Lab, and I pulled those documents down, saved them in my drive so that I could then turn around and provide them to the GPT. There are different ways to do it with GPT plus Bing with varying levels of success. We'll talk about those in future sessions and how you can do sort of chain of logic using Bing and GPT, but we'll stick to just documentation right now. Okay, so I want to make a correction to this section, but I've already created all of this content, right? Like what happens now? Well, here's what happens is I'm going to come in here. I'm going to make this edit. I changed my mind. I want you to improve this. So for the customer analysis, include discussion and overview of Army Futures Command, which is the superior command to Army Applications Lab, right? Okay, so wow, all my stuff went away, right? Like that whole branch of content is now gone. And now it's redoing this section, right? So I've taken this branch in the tree and said, hey, I want you to revise that. So it's going to go through and revise all of that content. It's great. So I can get a higher net level of quality. And there it's going to talk about all that stuff. But all of my other content is still here. So if you haven't noticed this before, there's this little toggle button here. So I can click back over and find all of that other content. So you can actually functionally run, if you think about this in sort of a branching function, you can run two separate options of an output, right? I can continue to create here, right? So it's like super string theory, like time is branching. And it's going to keep working through. And then if I go back up here where I branched out, right, here's my toggle right here. I can branch back over and find this other version that was created. Now, I will say, if you toggle back and forth while it's actually generating, it'll stop, right? So you might have to hit regenerate. So don't toggle back and forth while it's actually doing the writing. But that's another pro tip that I'll share with you is I like to do almost A versus B testing when I'm generating content and going through because, because it works, and particularly when we're doing a chain of thought, right? Chain of thought just means you take a really big task and you break it down to smaller tasks like we did with that initial prompting, right? We took this entire capture plan and broke it down into individual sections and then told it what to do in each individual section and then had it generate each individual section. That's a chain of thought because we do it one step at a time. So you can branch those chains as you're generating to try and find the highest quality, the most useful content at the end, right? Perfect. All right. So we're coming up on time. I hope this was super useful. Those of you who joined today, I will go ahead and show. I'll drop a link in the chat here for the most recent prompt card or smart card that we created. And that is for creating a teaming matrix, actually. So how do you take a solicitation or something like that and convert it into a teaming matrix relatively quickly, right? I hate doing that personally. The whole like PDF to Word to Excel is a huge pain. So take a look at that. We'll push it out probably on Monday to everybody else, but you all get access to it first. And everyone have a great weekend.